Back to our studio, Professor Huo. So what do you think the meeting will achieve in the end? Do you think the two sides can come to some kind of a consensus? Because a lot of people are saying maybe there won't be any headlines making news this time around.
Well, that's true. I hope it's a healthy dialogue. A healthy body is a body that functions smoothly. You don't feel particular stomach pain or heartbeat. So in this dialogue, I'm not expecting a headline blitz, in a sense that if that's the case, then that's not going to be a healthy dialogue. So this is going to be the first dialogue, strategic and economic dialogue, ever since Obama took place. So everybody have a high expectation, but let's keep it healthy. So don't expect too much difference or blitz.
Well, Professor Huo, why have the two sides incorporated the previous two dialogues into one? We've changed the economic and strategic dialogues into one single phrase. Why is that?
I think for publicity, if you combine two shows into one, especially one big fireworks, then that's going to draw big attention. Especially those dialogues, either strategic or economics, there have been, I think there are more than 10 times of those dialogues. So over the time, I think people lose attention on that. So ever since President Obama took place and after the April G20 meeting, and for U.S. and China have this joint strategic and economic dialogue held in one place and one time, I think that's definitely going to draw people's attention. Now, we're all focusing on how these two countries will come to some conclusions. Let's just wait and see.
Does it signify any changes from the Bush administration's policy about China-U.S. relations?
Oh, definitely. If you remember the beginning of Bush Jr. administration, where he was considering China as strategic opponent, and instead of sort of a cooperation, coordination type of dialogue. So I think time has changed, and the last time when Bush administration considered China as a competitor, as an opponent, that kind of a climate atmosphere does not exist now.
Okay. And the main topics of this strategic dialogue within the framework of the first China-U.S. strategic and economic dialogues will cover three aspects. They are bilateral relations, international and regional issues, and global issues. Chinese officials say that through this round of strategic dialogue, China hopes to expand consensus, narrow down the differences, deepen mutual trust, and boost cooperation with the U.S. side. So, Professor Huo, can we expect the new mechanism will give a boost to the Sino-U.S. economic and political relationship?
I think just one dialogue will not boost anything, but it's
the mechanism itself.
The mechanism itself, especially if the mechanism can continue this kind of dialogue for next 2 or 3 years, and that's going to make some progress, especially when these two countries, such big countries, they're going to make decisions over the whole world affairs. So I'm expecting a more healthy dialogue between these two countries, and what I'm emphasizing is the mechanism.
Well, the world is still suffering financial and economic crisis. Thinking about the dialogue between the world's biggest developed country and largest developing country, how this cooperation will affect the world's economy?
It will affect the world economy a lot. Take, for instance, world financial crisis. If China and U.S. disagree on especially the exchange rate, say, regime, or on the pattern of development, then the world, excluding China and the U.S., will see what the conflict will result in. But in this kind of dialogue climate, these two countries are cooperation. So I'm expecting the rest of the world will be putting a lot of hope on this dialogue, hoping that there are no more conflicts between these two countries.
Well, that's why so many experts are very focusing on how this marriage will unfold. Some even term it Chimerica or G2. But it seems that this marriage is on the rock. China is worried about its U.S. bonds value, and U.S. is also urging China to open its door more widely. Do you think the two countries are able to address these differences?
Well, those are significant differences, and we should face it. We are not avoiding or turn our back on those differences. And of course, adjusting its growth pattern, or especially on the renminbi or treasury bond issues, that's going to take at least 3 to 5 years to resolve it. So let's face it, there are problems, but before we face the problems, two good friends must face each other, sit down and say, let's resolve it, and let's not be quarrel about it.
Let's face it and resolve it together. Well, it's already turning out to be a busy year for Sino-U.S. ties, and now let's take a look at the high-level U.S. delegations that have already visited China this year. Well, Professor Huo, very frequent visits of U.S. officials to China, especially the recent visits by Stephen Chu and Gary Locke. It seems that they have put spotlight on Obama administration's calls for more cooperation with China on energy and climate change issues. Why do you think the Obama administration are so focusing on these areas?
Well, let's face it, world financial crisis is there, and it's going to be a long issue to be resolved. But the climate and the energy are the concerns for the whole humankind. And for China and the U.S., for these two countries, they have great command on these two issues. So let's discuss the world concerned issues first. And I'm hoping that, and the fact is that, on these two issues, these two countries have very little disagreement. Of course, there are some minor things need to be resolved, but I'm seeing it as a good start.
But many are arguing that maybe U.S. is asking more from China to reduce its carbon emissions, but China is not so willing to give an exact date and agenda on that. Do you think the two can see eye to eye on that?
Definitely China, which is still on the development stage, unlike the U.S. So I see these are the things need to be negotiated. But remember, it's a climate or it's an energy issue, but if you translate it into economic terms, it can be resolved. So don't take it as an ideology issue. Take it as an economic issue. That's a better way to resolve things.